broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning, and thank you everyone for joining today's webinar, The New Roadmap to Success. Before we begin, I'd like to go over a couple quick announcements. All microphones have been placed on mute for the duration of this webinar. Should you have any questions throughout, please put your questions in the questions tab here in the GoToWebinar panel. We'll try to get to some as time permits. We did have some questions coming in advance, so thank you to those who submitted. At this point, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. As a partner at Bloom, Amy Allen leads our human resource advisory practice, where she focuses on working with clients on the people side of their business. Amy has over 25 years of experience in human resources, including holding leadership and executive roles at Suffolk Construction, the Boston Globe, Planned Parenthood, Staples, and other large national organizations. Amy brings best practices in the areas of people and culture to include talent acquisition and onboarding, performance management, executive coaching, employee relations, compliance, succession planning, organizational design, benefit plan design and administration, employee rewards programs, and learning and development. Next up, as the director in the advisory services group, Mike LaCrosse has 20 years of experience in finance and accounting across various industries. At Bloom, Mike leads efforts to work with clients on a variety of operational efficiency and process improvement projects by using the firm's CFO advisory offerings and business enterprise review framework. As part of our CFO advisory practice, we've recently merged with the Brighton company that focuses on outsourced CFO, controller, and accounting services. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to Mike LaCrosse to begin today's presentation.
Good morning and welcome. Jared, can you confirm you can hear me?
Yes, all set.
Great, thank you. So today we're going to take you through what we here at Bloom call the roadmap to success. Here, what we're going to do is present you with the 4 stages that businesses are going through to make sure that they succeed in the new normal that we now live in. Those 4 stages include survival, pivoting, adapting and stabilizing, and ultimately evolving. On this page, what you'll see is a quick little roadmap of what this looks like. So what we've been dealing with in the last 6 months is primarily around survival. How do we keep the operations running? If your business has been impacted by COVID, and most of our clients have, they've gone through a lot of changes here in the last 6 months. And we're starting to see these businesses come out of the survival mode, whether it was they're getting back to businesses and they're starting to pivot. Maybe they've got some PPP money that has come to them. But we're starting to see coming out of survival and moving into the pivoting portion of the roadmap here. So as business begins to return and reopen, we need to also figure out how do you stabilize this business in the new environment and then ultimately evolve and thrive and grow. But overall, we're starting to see our clients move from survival to pivoting. So as the pandemic continues in this country, we are re-entering. Even New York City just announced yesterday that they're reopening the restaurants starting at the end of September, which is a very big step in this country. It's while you're thinking about your business, what we're hoping is that you're out there thinking about what is important from your perspective, your employees, and how are you reflecting on what has happened, what some of the return to work strategies are, how do you prepare for what's ahead. What you're going to see in the next few slides that we're going to go through are areas to consider when you're going through these 4 stages: the financial, people, and product and services.
I think I'll take it from here. Good morning, everybody. Jared, you can hear me all right?
Yes, we can, Amy. Thanks.
Great. So happy that you all could join us. I'm going to pick up on this stage 1 survival and take us back in time to when the pandemic first hit. And all of our businesses had to think about how to just keep our operation going. As I think back to this, it's sort of like what it would be like physically dealing with being in shock. We were all turning to a very reactive way of managing our businesses. We were focusing on the liquidity and the forecasting. We were all struggling with what to do with our workforce with regards to layoffs, furloughs, the stimulus packages, including the CARES Act and the PPP funding. It was interesting as I think back, because I remember not only being in shock and being reactive, but I also remember expecting this to just last a couple weeks. We all were thinking about how are we going to transition to a remote workforce? How are we going to make sure people had their equipment and have support from working from home? If we were a business that had to be at work, manufacturing, distribution organizations, we were thinking about how are we going to have our people be at work safely. With the stimulus package, I remember there were weeks of trying to determine, am I under 500 employees? We were scrambling with the banks and how to make sure that we had filed claims for the loans. We struggled with what's the difference, little things like what is even the difference between furloughs and layoffs. And we also struggled with supply chain concerns, both personally, as we all remember the toilet paper shortage, and professionally, as we were worried about how we were going to get the necessary products out that we needed, or even products in that we needed to keep our businesses running. If you continue to look at the survival stage, we as a professional services firm were not only trying to figure it out internally like any other business, but we also were having to figure out how to advise our clients externally. From the people side of the business, as I said, not only were we helping people to define and decide whether they wanted to lay off or furlough or take pay cuts, we were also helping our clients figure out what to do for people who were actually getting sick or whose family members were getting sick. It was a time that on the people side of the business, we were dealing with more than just the tactical. We were also dealing with the personal, the sense of panic, the fear, the unknown. And it was very much like operating in a fog. Mike, I don't know if you want to jump in on the financial and the product side of survival stage.
Yeah, just to add a couple of things here, just like what Amy was saying earlier, is most business really had to think about liquidity and cash flow. We haven't really had to think too much about, or at least a lot of our clients haven't had to think about liquidity and cash flow a lot in the past, where they always had a decent amount of cash on the books, and ultimately what happened is, well, it was a big hit. How do we go from making a strong amount of cash every month to going to almost zero overnight, and planning for that in the future? A lot of the customers that our clients had to think about, are they going to actually get payment from those customers? Their receivables, their aged receivables continue to grow and grow and grow. Were they ever going to see payment from those customers, or was it going to have to be written off as bad debt? And then, from a CARES Act and PPP perspective, it was great that the government came out with these programs, but how do we actually go and get this? And all the different rules that came out every week and almost every day on what was going to be included and what wasn't going to be included. And then around the products and services side, did you have enough? Did you have too much inventory? I mean, you never know based on what is happening and what's going to ultimately change. So you had to really think about your demand planning. Where are your products and services going to come from? What if the supplier closes? I like to think about what happened to restaurants as the easiest example. They were forced to close, laid everyone off, got PPP money. Now they're opening back up, but they have restrictions. Can you open up 25%, 50%, 100%, depending on which state you're in? So how will I survive at 50%? Next page, Jared. So here's some of the lessons that we ultimately learned here in the last 6 months. Cash is king. The old adage is still out there, and it's still as important that make sure that you have some sort of reserve of cash on your books. Contingency planning. A lot of businesses really think of contingency planning as what happens if the market crashes 10%, 20%, whatever it may be. How many people are really thinking about a pandemic where your business go from X to down 100%, or maybe it's 50% or 75%. But also think about the other side of it. Amy mentioned toilet paper. The demand for toilet paper went through the roof. How are you going to increase production of toilet paper to meet all the demands, or hand sanitizer, or things like that? And continuing on the financial side, is forecasting the future demand of whatever that product or service that you have is going to be important. I'll continue to say this. From a people perspective, we learned that people can work remotely. We learned that what is it going to mean from a commercial real estate perspective in the future? And what is ultimately the impact of all this on productivity and budgets? And then, as I mentioned, the products and services side is the demand for products and services ultimately dried up. So how are you going to deal with that? How are you going to think about what inventory you have in the books as a significant portion of your cash flow? And then can you pivot to selling new products or services or looking at SKU rationalization? So what some of the things, next page, please, Jared. Some of the things that we started to think about from actions to take and telling our clients is go out there and get the PPP money. Now what we're telling them is go and get the forgiveness. There's really very few companies that we're seeing that really shouldn't be getting the vast majority of that money forgiven. Think about your liquidity and your cash flow. Make sure that you're doing weekly cash flow forecasts at least 13 weeks out is what is typically standard, we'll call it during normal times. But now you may want to be thinking 6 months, 9 months out. Think about contingency planning. What happens if there's a second wave? Make sure you're doing the financial stress test, looking at business interruption claims. And then from the people side is make sure that you have a good handle on your benefits administration, your remote worker management, and staffing strategies. So, Amy, I'll pass it off to you to add anything and move into stage 2.
Yeah, definitely. What I would add is it's some of the takeaways from this survival stage is figuring out what are the critical systems that we need in order to make sure that benefits and basically overall HR administration can happen smoothly, effectively, and from a remote standpoint. It's all about easy, efficient, and continuing to make sure that your employees are having a positive employee experience, even through times of fear and panic and the unknown. So when it comes to administration, making sure that we have the right systems in place to be able to react with some of the takeaways that we took from the survival phase. Great, to the next stage, Jared, please. So stage 2 is pivoting to the new normal, getting us back to work. That back to work looks differently for different industries, but no matter what your business, as you start to look at reopening, it's time to re-examine what business needs to look like at this point in time. And are there changes we still need to make in order to be more efficient, more productive, and ensure that our employees are feeling safe? It's time to focus on strategic planning and also to be able to pivot your business as things are changing weekly. It's at this stage that I think we've been in since late June, early July, and we've had many clients that have put together COVID strategy task force. These are task force or groups of employees, really critical that those task force are diverse set of employees in terms of their level, their position, and even their location. And these task force groups have been assigned with asking questions, and not just asking questions once, but asking these questions almost every other week. And those questions are, what do we want to continue doing that we've been doing because of the survival mode? What do we want to stop doing? The latest trend phrase is Zoom fatigue. I hope a lot of you have heard of that phrase, Zoom fatigue. We've had a lot of clients that have said, if we never have another Zoom meeting, it'll be fine with us. But are there other things that we had to do during survival that we want to stop now that we're in stage 2? What do our customers need, and how have they changed because of coming out of survival? And what do our employees need coming out of survival? So asking those 4 questions, what do we continue? What do we stop? What do our customers need? What do our employees need? As a task force, make sure that you're tracking the answers, that you make decisions around whatever those answers are, and then also be able to change, because you might make decisions one week based on those the answers to those questions, and then the next week those answers may change and you have to pivot. Next slide, please. So when it comes to stage 2 in the people side of the business, there are several factors that we've had to consider, and using these task force and these return to work czars has been a really positive strategy for many of our clients. Being fluid and agile is critical, and your plan should always consider the following categories when it comes to the people side of the business. So facilities and safety, if we have to be back to work or we want to be back to work, making sure that we have the right supplies, the masks, the hand sanitizers, the right directional instructions in the office, all of the 6 feet apart necessities for us to stay healthy and safe. Ensuring that we're figuring out how to best return people from furlough or layoff, deciding the who, the when, the why is really critical to be thoughtful about. You want to be careful of discrimination in these cases, that you're pulling people back from furlough or layoff for business reasons, and that's really clearly thought out and documented. You want to obviously, and we all know this from going to the restaurants, we always have to self-certify that we are not showing symptoms or not feeling symptoms or feeling sick. There's a number of apps and systems out there that can help you do this electronically. We have many clients that really just have employees go into a room as they come in and self-certify and take their temperature and sign in that they're not showing symptoms. There's several different strategies in order to make sure that self-certification is happening, but it's also a critical component to getting people back to work. Can't say enough about communication. We all know that there's never enough communication. There's no such thing as too much communication, but this is especially true during the stage 2 that I believe that we're in now. You need to have someone who is in charge of this. It would be, in the best case scenario, an executive that can help people feel that somebody's at the helm, instill feelings of trust. But even if executives are uncomfortable with lots of communication, then that task should be delegated. Even if you don't know an answer, or even if it's bad news, over communicating is critical to give people confidence and trust in getting back to work. We have all the compliance issues with posters, and we need to train all of our employees on the safety measures of getting back to work. And then the last 3 bullets I really wanted to highlight in terms of the competitive market. Interestingly enough, over the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've been hearing a lot from our clients about high turnover. We have had more open positions. We've had more clients asking us to help them fill open positions. We actually have double the amount of open positions today than we did last year at this time. And it's really interesting to analyze the reasons for this turnover and the open positions. I think a lot of it has to do with some of these positions being put on hold during the survival stage. But as we're seeing this, it's even more important to look at your competitive nature to the market, or how competitive you are to the market. Whether you do a market analysis of your comp, whether you're looking at policy review, are our paid time off policies competitive, and looking at overall benefits, and are there things that people are able to get improved benefits in other places. That's really critical during the stage 2, so that we can get people back to work. The intention is to get people back to work, not lose them to other employers. So really important to look at comp benefits in your policies to make sure you're competitive to the market.
So moving on to the financial and the operations side of stage 2, I think one of the most important things that what you're going to hear is it's really important to be fluid and agile in this time. As Amy said, having someone who's the point of contact for all these discussions is really helpful. And then, specifically on the financial side, I've already mentioned this, and I'll continue to say, is focus on planning to guide your business towards a successful future by forecasting the demand of products and your services. Reach out to your customers, understand what they're going through, understand what their demand is going to be. But also look at, what is your business going to look like in the future? Are you going to sell new products? Are you going to sell hand sanitizers and masks, and you've never done that before? We've certainly seen a lot of clients pivot to selling PPE type of equipment. But then also, how do you transform your business to continue to survive? Again, I'm going to continue with restaurants as an example. Are you going to start to sell through DoorDash? Are you going to have pickups? Are you going to be seating outside? What do you do if you're in the Northeast and it's winter? Probably not going to be having a lot of people who eat outside, and what do you do next? From an operations side, think about the SKU rationalization or service rationalization. Do you need to continue to offer the same number of SKUs or services that you always have? Again, thinking back to the restaurants, how do they decide? Most restaurants that I've seen are offering a more limited menu. It wasn't as full of a menu as it was. So how do they decide what to sell and what not to sell? Do they do a profitability assessment to figure out where they're making their money, where they're losing their money? Do they talk to the supply chains to figure out what goods and services they can or cannot get? Or maybe they just had to hire someone new, like you said, in the turnover. Maybe they just have a new chef. never really know. So actions to take. So, if you're in this business, in a business and running a business, and you're going through what you think is stage 2 right now, take a step back, assess your business, figure out what's working, what's not working. Think about putting together a strategic plan with various different scenarios. Make sure you think about upside of 10, 20%, downside 10, 20%, but also think about the major bottom that we've just had or major increase that you've just had. Also think about cutting back on costs of operational expenses or overhead expenses. Is this an opportunity to look at outsourcing, whether it's managed services in finance and accounting, or is it from a fractional interim CFO or controller? Also in HR and IT, there's areas where you can do managed services in those areas. And then from a people perspective, determine what the back to work plan is. I'm sure you've got that by now. Look at your handbook and your policies, as Amy mentioned. Do you have the right talent in your team today? Then again, assess it where your business is and determine what you're going to need for the future. So Amy, I'll pass off to you and move on to stage 3.
Yeah, a couple of things to add before we move to the next slide. Identification of top talent is a bullet that I wanted to highlight. This stage 2 is the opportunity to know who your high risk employees are, especially if they're critical to the business. As a part of that market competitiveness, understanding who are our top talent. Top talent, from my perspective, is defined as those people who are the top performers, but who also have the most potential and who might be riskiest to the business if they were to go somewhere else. So there's a number of tools, 9box is one of them, that you all could use to identify top talent. But most important is to just have a conversation as a HR leadership team to ensure that we know who they are and that we have a sense of their satisfaction. The other thing that I would add on the HR assessment, this is the time to look at your HR functionality, whether you have an HR department or not. If there's individuals who are managing the HR components of your business, whether, as we've talked about, benefits administration or hiring, really looking at the functionality of the people side of your business, this is a good time to take a look at that. Everything from looking how you're sourcing candidates to looking how your HRIS is functioning. This is a good time to look at that. Ready for the next slide. Thanks, Jared. So stage 3, this is sort of a crystal ball for us right now as we're still managing through stage 2, but we're starting to see light at the end of the tunnel. Stage 3 will be an opportunity for us to look at new business models and how we're going to evolve back into a sustainable success. And we should still be analyzing, but hopefully analyzing in a way that isn't week to week and can be more long-term. Looking at market conditions and demand for your products and services, the profitability of your products or services. Are there certain products or services that were in pilot or test mode, or that you know from the past 2 stages that we should stop doing or stop offering? Staffing considerations and bringing employees back to support the new business model. As Mike had mentioned, looking to outsource non-core functions or even components of them. This is a time where we can start thinking more long-term. I also wanted to mention in this stage 3, as we enter into it, there are some critical triggers that we need to consider as we're thinking about this. All of the talk about a fall resurgence of COVID needs to be on our mind. The impact of school openings, we're starting to see this every day on the impact to the country with school reopening. We obviously have a big election ahead of us that could dramatically impact how we're looking at this stage 3 in the future of our business. And also, of course, the development of a vaccine. Those 4 things are right on our heels, in the next 8 to 10 weeks. And I think important to keep in mind and think about as you're planning and analyzing, take those 4 factors into consideration. With regards to adapting and stabilizing, I'll talk about the people side of the business. Really important during this phase to survey employees. I'm hoping many of you are already surveying your employees. It can be as easy as sending out 5 questions through SurveyMonkey. But really important for employees to feel like you care important that you do care, but also important that they feel like you care about their comfort level and any of their concerns through surveys. We all know that the biggest mistake you can make with surveying employees is if you don't respond, listen, or act. So make sure to not only do the surveys, but have a response to the results and take some action as in accordance to the results. We talked about assessing your HR function, investing in leadership training, especially as a result of learning to lead remotely. There are some very different competencies and skills that come along with leading remotely, especially those related to delegation or conflict resolution or coaching, and setting expectations in this new COVID environment. And just to reiterate again, to over communicate. Mike, you want to talk about the other two?
Yeah, absolutely. I think what you'll see from a financial and operations perspective is that the difference between stage 2 and stage 3, and what I talk about is going to be relatively the same. The difference between stage 2 and stage 3 is really about analysis, analyzing where you've been to ultimately pivot and then find a way to get to stage 3 and end up back. So when you're thinking about putting new business models and to ultimately maintain success, it's again, what products and services am I going to offer? It's going to be a little bit different. It's looking at the market conditions. They're changing on a daily, weekly basis. What is the new demand going to be? And working closely with your customers to ultimately forecast what that demand is. And then again, going back to the profitability of products and services, is it time to stop selling certain products? Is it time to look at your pricing? Is it time to sell new products? And then again, think about how you go and execute each of these products and services, selling these products and services. You want to take 16?
Sure. So action items. This slide is just to summarize and ensure that we all have a good idea of what we want some of the takeaways to be. So as Mike mentioned, the profitability assessment, business valuation, economic and market analysis, that this is really a time of assessment and analysis. From a people side of the business, we want to be making some compensation and benefits decisions in order to stay market competitive. We should be looking at our organizational structure and how are we restructuring with regards to the new business model. We talked about employee learning and development, particularly related to leadership. And we talked about the HR functionality review. That functionality review, as I said, taking a look at how we're sourcing and attracting candidates, how we're selecting, how we're onboarding, managing, engaging, developing, and offboarding. These are all parts of the HR function that can be looked at from a review perspective and a compliance perspective. Hand it off to you, Mike, for the next slide.
Great. Jared, if you could flip the page to 17. Great. So now we're getting into stage 4. So now that we've stabilized, how do we get to evolving and thriving and ultimately growing? So you've adapted to a new business environment. What does that really mean to get to the next level? Now, think about what you've done a year ago. Is it focusing on profitable growth and cash generation? Is it looking at procedures to ultimately operate your business in this new environment? Is it looking at efficiencies and productivity and how ultimately that is driven by technology? So, I think what's key here, if you can go to the next page, Jared, is how do you make business decisions going forward? We now have contingency plans. Hopefully you've got a strategic plan in place that you can ultimately be able to pivot your business if something big happens again, if a second wave comes up. But how are we going to be focused on growing your business and what this new normal is? Hopefully you've been able to, again, reduce your products and your SKUs to what's profitable, or maybe you're adding new products and services that are ultimately, again, profitable to your business in the future. Will that demand stay for hand sanitizers? Will it continue to stay up for face masks? But it's making sure that you have a contingency plan, strategy, both positive and negative, and making sure that you have a goal of achieving profitable and cash generation. But with the thought of, is there another wave? Is there a natural disaster that could happen, or a major event that could happen? And then again, on the products and services side, is think about investing in technology. A lot of our clients, what we're seeing today, is that they've really been focused on they continue to do the same thing every single month or year. We're really pushing them to invest in software, invest in technology to drive efficiency. or that's going to enable you to, one, become more profitable, but able you to pivot the business if something else happens again. Think about your cash management. Make sure you're keeping inventory to a minimum. Inventory seems to be the biggest cash strain of the vast majority of our clients. Then also think about your manufacturing needs. If you're a manufacturing business, do you need to increase the capacity of your operation? Do you need to think about doing 3 shifts? Do you need to think about a new location because the demand has increased? Or maybe you found a way to be more efficient and maybe think about reducing the size of your footprint. Amy, you want to talk about the people side?
Sure, thank you. So at this evolution stage, we really are going to be starting to think about what remote work looks like long term. We've started to get feedback from people on the job search and people who are considering making a move. And for those candidates today, remote work is going to become an expectation versus a plus. So looking at what does remote work look long term for us is really important to our evolution. Leadership roles and expectations, not only with regards to remote workers, but overall with regards to managing expectations and empathy with regards to safety and health, is going to be really critical in the future of culture. Looking at policies and compliance, we have a whole host of COVID policies that we need to make available to employees through the end of the year, and I'm sure there's going to be continued policies and compliance issues into 2021. Really important, however, for us to move out of this COVID experience, solidifying our culture, meaning understanding what are our core values, have they remained the same, have they changed, and solidifying those core values into a culture that people can describe as a brand, and ensuring that the employee experience is as positive and aligned with that culture is really important in this stage 4.
Great. So our final slide, I think we've talked about this, but what are some of the actions that you can ultimately take, and how could potentially Bloom help you? So think about your software and the technology that you have, and what implementations can you do that maybe you've been holding off on that could really help drive efficiencies and productivity. Also, again, I can't stress this enough, but make sure that you have a business plan, a strategic plan, a contingency plan in place for your businesses. It's really absolutely crucial. Then Amy, obviously you talked about these items as well. Is make sure you continue to assess your HR group. Make sure you're looking at areas that could potentially be outsourced for, similar to what we talked earlier about outsourcing, accounting, IT, et cetera. There's areas in HR where you can continue to look at. And talent acquisition is, again, probably the most important focus on having the right people in the right seats. I think overall, what if there's one thing you could really take away from this presentation is the status quo just really isn't going to work anymore. You got to be able to be agile and be able to pivot for any of the needs for the future. So I guess, Jared, I guess we can open up to questions at this point.
Yeah, absolutely. We do have a couple that have come in here. Let me just pull them up for you. So the first one is any strategic shifts regarding approach to servicing clients in the future?
So I guess to answer that, the answer is yes. It's certainly going to determine on which industry you're in, but absolutely there's going to be a shift. If you're, I'm going to use the professional services industry from our perspective, is we are working the vast majority of remote today. We're not visiting our clients as much as we used to. We are, if we are visiting them, we're taking all the precautions. We're going by their policies of entering a facility. We're sitting in conference rooms more than 6 feet apart. But I think the key thing is that the strategy for approaching your clients is going to absolutely change, and something that you have to think about, but it really all depends on what industry to really help answer that with a concise manner.
Mike, I think this one kind of goes off what you were just talking to there, and that's, for professional service firms in particular that gain new business primarily via in-person meetings. Have you heard of any success stories regarding capturing new business in this virtual environment?
Absolutely, and I think what I'll use as an example of our own firm, just as an example. As I just mentioned, we're primarily remote. We're not out there meeting people to talk about their problems, but we are meeting primarily over Zoom or Teams or GoToMeeting, whatever people are using these days. And what we've seen is our business is continuing to grow. So I think, again, it's all going to be dependent on the industry that you're in, but ultimately from a professional services perspective and thinking about Bloom and our clients, we're continuing to meet them. Business really hasn't changed. And then once we are winning this business, we're still ultimately able to support them. And to be honest with you, sometimes it's even easier with the sharing of the screens that we're doing lately. Before we'd be leaning over people's shoulders and looking at things on their computer. Now we're just sharing the screens and it's able to really continue to progress business, and we're still growing as I think a lot of businesses are.
Great. If anyone has any last minute questions, feel free to throw them in there. But with that being said, I think that wraps up what we've got in terms of questions. So thank you to everyone who's attended today. The recording of this will be emailed out along with the slides. So feel free to reach out to the presenters. Their contact information will be on there. If you have any questions following up from today, you can reach out to them personally and we'll be here to help. So thank you so much for attending and appreciate your time this morning.